Hello, this is the Coach and Benway Show. I'm your host or co-host, Coach Red Pill. I'm joined by Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, please introduce yourself.
It is me, the good doctor, even though I'm not a doctor. I hope everybody's healthy tonight. The doctor is in the house.
So we're going to be talking about Russia and chemical weapons and that whole shit show, which turned out to be nothing but bullshit, apparently. And it is very, very creepy as all get out, and we're going to get into that right now. And after that, we're just going to let the conversation go where it will. So you're just going to have to stick to it and join us on this ride. So, Benway, you want to kick off with the whole Russia and chemical weapons thing?
Oh, where to start first? It feels like we've had so many different paths to trying to reach to the same conclusion, right? So in the near term, the immediate near term, what do we have? We had a chemical poisoning of some Russians living in England. We've had the Syrian chemical weapons attacks, which somehow, in some way, we always feel Russia must have had a part in it. And God, what else? We have the, certainly the election meddling, what have you. But even then, this just feels like the recent season of this campaign, isn't it? I mean, I feel like we have been trying to push the Russians as the great bogeyman, at least for the past, 5 years? Probably at least since 2008, if you want to take a longer view. It just doesn't stop.
I disagree. Remember when, what's his name, Mitt Romney was saying that Russia was the real enemy back in the 2012 election, and Obama poo-pooed that whole notion that, he doesn't know what he's talking about, basically. And it was after that Russia started coming into focus as, quote unquote, the enemy. I would say that it really started like around 2015, after the fall of Libya.
I was just before that. I would say the Crimea situation certainly.
Right. Yeah, the Ukrainian Crimea.
Yeah, and the reason why I want to say, I have political reasons to want to say 2008. The reason I say that is because that's when the Georgian expedition happened, and I want to tie this into EU. EU expansion.
But nobody cared about Georgia. I don't really think so. I think it was really started with the Ukrainian situation. I mean, thinking back on it. And that was 2014. I think that's when Russia popped on the radar as the enemy, and because he went against what the neocons wanted. The neocons wanted to have NATO bases in Ukraine, which is just stupid. Okay, I've never quite understood this obsession with poking at Russia all the time. Russia's got so many problems that they don't need more problems. Okay, the problems that they have in terms of declining population, alcoholism, corruption, blah, 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 all kinds of internal problems that they have, not to mention all these nationalities within them. Russia has so many problems that why on earth do the neocons want to cause more trouble with Russia, unless it's just really because they just want more arms sales and they want those sweet, sweet commissions from the arms sales and the weapons manufacturers or something like that. I don't quite understand it. What exactly is the point? What is to be won by having a war with Russia? Please explain that to me.
So I think the first thing you always have to remember about neocons is that they are not secretly exceptional economic actors who are going to gain from it. For example, I always say, when people say, the Iraq war was all about getting the oil. I'm like, well, if only we got the oil, it would have been perhaps worth it. We didn't get jack shit out of Iraq War II. There is no oil to be made. I don't think you can credit these guys as exceptionally successful, like arms dealer guys who are going to really get the sweet deals from there. I think, could you say that? Yeah, do they gain money from working at the, the Council on Foreign Relations, getting jobs in the State Department? Yeah, sure. But I think it's worse than that. I think they really do have the ideology that's competing against, like a realist goal, which is to say, like, hey, nations have borders and they have goals that they want to achieve, and they fight to, secure those goals. I think these guys have a grander vision of saying, the world is a better place when everybody's just a liberal democracy that's hooked on capitalism. That way, everything, is going to be more peaceful, more successful. We'll all be happier, so on and so forth. Ironically, they think they're having a mission of peace when they are, in fact, the people most likely to lead you to the next war. Does that mean that they're kind of stupid? Yeah, I will say that.
No,
Do they believe it?
I think that they're idiots. I think that look, Russia has geography problems. Number one, because for all intents and purposes, there is no natural border between the Oder-Neisse line and Moscow, because it's just a flat plain. Okay, so the Russians have always had border states, Belarusia and Ukraine. Ukraine, the word means borderland. Okay,
Right.
and it's always been the buffer zone. And the Russians have always been very touchy when their buffer zones get touched, because for them that's the red line. That's when their borderlands, when Belarusia and Ukraine start being infringed upon, that's when the Russians get nervous, because they feel that they're going to get invaded, because there are no natural obstacles. It's just an endless plain.
And because historically they were invaded through
Yeah.
the Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. Through the Ukraine, and yeah, so they're very worried about that. So for them, they've always considered Belarusia and Ukraine theirs, quote unquote. Fairly or not, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about it from a practical matter, right? And so the Americans and the Europeans, they keep encroaching on territories that the Russians rightfully view as their borderlands, the buffer zones that protect the Russian homeland, by trying to integrate them into the EU, by trying to integrate them into NATO. And what does that mean, integrating them into NATO? It doesn't mean that it becomes a security pact that guarantees the security of Ukraine and Belarusia. Well, Belarus is never going to go in NATO, but you know what I mean. It becomes that the NATO forces are that much closer to Russia, that much closer to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that makes them nervous. And there's no reason to poke the bear. You don't fuck with the bear. If the bear is just lying there not doing much, leave him alone. The only reason... Go ahead.
Remember the last time we were actually fairly friendly with Russia? It's easy to remember. It was basically in the 90s when the Western countries basically had Russia as its pet bitch.
Yeah.
And if you ask Russians, what was the worst memory they had? They probably won't even say communism, even though they will not be happy with that period of time. The most debased period they ever lived in was the 90s, when the oligarchs were like crazy. Our media, the Time magazine, flagrantly announces like that, hey, you meet the United States consultants who successfully made sure that Yeltsin was around for another fucking presidential cycle. The country, every problem that kind of still persists in Russia today has its origin in that period.
Yeah.
It was, and that's why Putin was successful. It's like whether, there's the people would say there's a difference between absolute debased corruption and everyday corruption. And Putin, to his success, brought us back to the security of everyday corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, we laugh at that, but there's truth to that.
Yeah.
We don't live in the hellhole that was Russia in the 90s.
No.
So we can't hold it against them to never want to go back there.
Yeah, because basically during the 90s, the Russians saw the ugly face of consumerism. And it was just sexual debauchery. It was just money trumps everything. It was just debasement of nationalism and what Russia meant as a culture and a nation. Everything that from the West was better than anything that Russia had to offer, which is insulting because Russia has a great culture, and quite frankly, its literature is second to none. I honestly believe that Russian literature is superior to anything produced in the Western democracies, certainly in the last 100 years. And looking back on it, I mean, of the 19th century novelists, you've got Dostoevsky, then Tolstoy, then Chekhov, and then any of the British or French novelists, come as distant seconds, really. Frankly, the only Western writers that can compare to Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov are probably Shakespeare and Cervantes, and leave it at that. I mean, in terms of like being head and shoulders above everybody else, they have a great culture, and to see it debased and mocked and ridiculed and hoard out as it was during the 90s must have been incredibly painful for them. And also, there's something else about Putin which I realize here. See, the Russian and Slavic women in general, they like their men made of stone. They say that. They want a man made of stone. And I've heard the expression many, many times. They want a guy who's tough as stone, who's like one line and says, "This is what we're gonna do," and they like their authoritarians. Okay, and that's what Putin is, because Yeltsin was a drunk. Everybody knew he was a drunk clown. But Putin is a man of stone, and that's why they respond to him. They love him for it. They love him because he's a tough son of a bitch who just plays chess better than any of his Western opponents.
This is why part of this is why I wanted to say that 2008 is still an important year. It's like I agree with you. 2014 is really when it gets in the public consciousness. But the reason I bring up 2008 because that was the year that the EU first started making its offers to those buffer countries, the historic, and by the way, the historic Russian lands. I mean, another major problem for Russia, and it isn't just Putin wanting to be a conqueror. It's this: we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where overnight significant members of our ethnic Russian community were minorities in other countries.
Yeah.
And that is a problem he's trying to figure out a way to resolve one way or another. And it's not just necessarily through conquest by any means. It's just, to protect the minority situation. I mean, like, honest to God, I mean, if, let's say all of a sudden, and it's kind of happening now, let's just say, ethnic Americans to such a degree that it exists, suddenly find themselves in a minority in, let me pick some place at random, California. And California suddenly decided to say, we're part of Mexico now. We would be troubled by that.
Exactly.
And I'll give you another real life example. It's a little different, but it's still got to keep in mind. South Africa. You're looking at a white minority there. What's happening there? You're going to tell me that nothing bad is at stake there? There isn't a reason to be concerned there? Bullshit. You're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to realize that this is the situation he finds himself in.
Yeah.
And interspersed with all of this is the EU saying, you know what, we're interested in having the EU and NATO. They're actually, they're different, but they tend to be, two different hands of the same oncoming threat from the Russian side, which is to say, hey, you know what, Ukraine and Georgia, we're kind of interested in having you join us.
Yeah.
We think it'll be good. We this, that, and the other. And Russia said from day one, those would be an unacceptable red line, and we will respond to that as a security threat.
Well, the thing is, see, the West promised Russia back in the 90s,
no more NATO expansion. No,
exactly.
Expansion. Yeah.
Look. If I'd been in charge in 1995, what I would have done is offered the Russians to join NATO. Okay, with the Russians in NATO. Okay, and figure out some sort of system whereby they use both Western and Russian arms or something like that, something along those lines, and NATO would become the European police force as opposed to any kind of perceived expansionary threat. Bring the Russians fully into NATO, because why not? That would have been the perfect opportunity. But of course they didn't. They screwed the pooch. Anyway, look, spilt milk, water under the bridge. And you're right about Putin's motivations, that he is concerned with those ethnic Russians. I believe that there's something like 30 million ethnic Russians that are outside of Russia.
It's a huge number.
Yeah. But the thing is also, you got to keep in mind that, by the way, the Russian population, if memory serves, is something like 130 million people, something like that.
Yeah, let me do a quick lookup of that because I think it's worthwhile to know.
Yeah, and the Russian diaspora of the former Soviet republics that are no longer a part of Russia, it's something along the lines of 30 million. So it's roughly a quarter. I do believe, I could be wrong. But
so there's 144 million Russian citizens, so people in Russia.
Right.
And so if I look let me see if I can look up Russians
outside of Russian Federation.
There's about 150 million Russians. So figuring that there's a number of ethnic minorities in Russia, I'd say about 20 to 30 million outside of Russia is probably right.
Yeah. So the point is that Putin is a Russian nationalist. He's not a communist. He's not a capitalist. He doesn't care about that. He looks like a pragmatist to me insofar as any kind of economic system is concerned. He figures like whatever works. I lived in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, and I always found it laughable when people said that Pinochet was all in favor of free markets and monetary policy and monetarist policies. Pinochet was a pragmatic man. He would use whatever was useful. That's why, for instance, he never denationalized the copper mines, because it was pragmatically better to have those big copper mines be a part of the Chilean state than to put them in private hands. But you see, they're pragmatists, and that's what Putin is. He's always been that. And his priority is those ethnic Russians and protecting Russia itself and having it grow again, having it develop again. Now, a man who has those priorities, right, he's not going to do something as stupid as try to kill a couple of nobodies, or one nobody and the innocent daughter of a nobody with a nerve agent in England. That's fucking insane, okay? And the whole thing just seems, it just smells stupid. From the get-go, it sounded stupid for, number one, the first reason. If they used nerve agent, how come they survived? They should have been dead, right? I mean, what the hell, right? This is supposed to be like the deadly nerve agent shit, and they survived it? What the fuck? Okay, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, the British agency at I forget the name of the Porton Downs, something Downs. You remember the name of the chemical laboratory? They were not able
I don't, but that sounds like a believable name.
Yeah. They were not able to find any evidence that this was actually Russian. Okay? They don't have anything. It was just Theresa May going off the handle, saying that it was the Russians who did it. And the vibe is that it was a Galtieri move, a distraction move. Okay, in Latin America, we called a Galtieri move for Leopoldo Galtieri, who was the dictator of Argentina in 1982. His country was falling apart economically. He had all kinds of domestic problems, so he went and invaded the Falkland Islands to distract everybody in Argentina. And after that, it was called a Galtieri move, when you do something random involving foreign policy to distract from a domestic situation. The domestic situation that Theresa May found herself was that she was playing her Brexit cards incredibly badly. Her government is a fucking disaster. And so as soon as this incident happened, because we don't even know what it was, really, she blamed it all on Russian agents and Russian chemical weapons. And so far, no proof, nothing. They're not releasing any information to anybody. And their own lab is saying, well, it might not have been the Russians after all. We don't really know. We don't really know where it came from. We don't even know if this is fucking Novichok shit, okay? They don't know anything. It's just Theresa May's word for it. And then we have the Syria situation. Why don't you talk about that?
Similar situation, actually, if you really think about how the beats play themselves out. What do we get? And it's a repetition of last year, as people may recall, which is, hey, we have some sort of arguably social media based, visual images of saying, oh my God, right at the cusp of Syria, the Syrian government's victory over the rebels, suddenly they decided, what would be a really witty thing to do?
Yeah.
Drop gas on people in a way that would just shock, I tell you, the Western democracies into just hating us more to wanting to kill us. That's clearly an exceptional chess playing move you got there.
Yeah.
So that happens. People say, we may not know 100% what happened, but we're goddamn convinced Assad did it. Let's bomb him.
Yeah.
And let's stir up the winds of hate for that. And then similar to last year, it's like, well, no, there's not a lot of concrete proof. The Russians said, well, let's actually look into this. No, we can't do that. Bomb that area.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. There's no evidence of it. There's scrapping evidence that, people may have faked it. Certainly the source of the material, the white hats, aren't very reputable on this front. In fact, I think the white hats are, in some sense, potentially.
They're propagandists. They're
propagandists, and they're probably supported by the West in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, they are. They are supported by the West, and they are propagandists. And there is video evidence of them being propagandists, of them videotaping "quote unquote" attacks. And it turns out that they're "quote unquote" saving people, but they're all actors. It's a play acting thing. There are videos of this shit, and it's easy to find on YouTube. Okay. Now, here's a key issue that I want to bring up, is that the OPCW, which is the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, this is interesting. It is not a UN body. People tend to confuse it as such, but it's not. It's its own little thing. Okay. It's headquartered in the Hague in the Netherlands, and it is
Mm-hmm.
formed by, I don't know how many hundreds of 140 odd countries or something, including the U.S. and Britain and France and all the others. And they are a completely independent body, and they are really independent. They do whatever the fuck they want, and they go and investigate chemical weapons attacks and any allegations. They went to the area where the Syrian government allegedly dropped chemical weapons. They weren't able to find any proof of that. They weren't able to find any evidence that there had been any chemical attack, and they have said that. They were there on August 21st, excuse me, April 21st, and just a week ago, or a little over a week ago. And so these guys were there, and there was nothing there. So it's like a big fat nothing burger. It was these white helmets reporting that this happened with some videotape, and all of a sudden the whole world is saying, let's start World War III over nothing, literally nothing. It just seems insane. It seems like the Western democracies, the governments of the Western democracies, are lying through their teeth about every goddamn thing because you can't take them seriously. It's all propaganda. It's all fake news. And they keep bitching and moaning. The MSM keeps bitching and moaning about fake news. This is fucking fake news, these chemical attacks.
What's also interesting about these chemical attacks, and it felt like this was the same case last year, and I even kind of feel that with a little bit less with the chemical attacks in England, but I felt like we had the rah rah system bomb, we're gonna get ready for war, and then Trump bombed places where there weren't too many people, and it feels like now we've forgotten it. And I thought to myself, why are they, why isn't the war drums keep pounding hard? I mean, I know there's some players who keep doing it, but I keep thinking to myself, is it dissipating because it's very clear among certain circles that, hey, a lot of the quote unquote evidence you have for a lot of this shit is bullshit. And rather than keep pounding it and making it, obvious that someone, who has potentially evidence that you're full of shit comes forward and really embarrasses you, they just think to themselves, okay, this one didn't work, so I'll just wait for the next attempt. I don't know, man, but it certainly feels kind of like, it wasn't as successful as we hoped. Let's quickly move on and wait for our next opportunity.
Yeah, it's like a con man whose con didn't work, so he's going to wait around for the next mark, see if the next one,
Yeah, sleight of hand. Kind of sleight. I feel that in a weird way.
Yeah.
It's funny. A couple of things I want to say. And it's the whole notion of like, we don't want to be associated with these brutal countries that would even conceivably use these chemical weapons, leaving aside the whole question of whether or not they actually use them. I'll tell you a little dirty, I don't know if it's a dirty secret, but it's just, it's kind of like an evil story I encountered. So when I was in high school, I was in an AP chemistry class. And so we went on a little trip to a local research center university that was doing a variety of interesting things with chemistry, like we're doing special paints for satellites and this, that, and the other. And we're walking through the halls, and I'm looking at like the window to one of the room, and has on it, sarin gas something, or sarin, and we're doing some research on it. And I point to the person who's leading the tour. I'm like, what are you doing with sarin gas? And she blanches and covers it up and said, you're not supposed to see that. And I said, what are you talking about? And like, she's like, we're actually studying ways to defend against sarin attack. Yeah, that's the ticket, right. Kind of thing. And this, to the point where my teacher even kind of went to me, says like, you got to be careful what you notice and what you don't notice, kind of thing.
Yeah,
kind of thing. And it was like, yeah, I guarantee you, the idea that no decent Western country would ever consider having these arsenals at their disposal is fooling themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't also like, it's kind of tangentially related, but not dissimilar. Like I saw recently, like they've been accidentally, declassifying, all of the various programs that the American military used against their own civilians, be it either from like launching some biological like disease into the area to see how it might spread, and actually people got infected and died, to brain control, to the thing that shocked the hell out of me. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was a participant in MK Ultra.
Really?
MK Ultra. He was, yeah. MK Ultra, for those gents who may not watch Stranger Things, there's very few of you probably. MK Ultra was the mind control program. It was the idea that we can teach people either to read people's thoughts or telekinesis or what have you. And they were injecting and doing a lot of crazy shit to people's brains when he was at Berkeley.
Yeah.
I think that was grad school,
Really?
undergrad or grad school. Yeah, he was subject to MK Ultra,
Really?
and we'll see. Yeah, exactly. When I saw that, I'm like, how the fuck did I not know that before? Because it just seems like holy shit,
Yeah.
insane. But there you go. I mean,
Yeah.
shit. We do bad shit. We
All the
just do.
time.
Yeah.
Well, look, going back to the Russia situation, the thing I find really troubling, okay, is that the Theresa May government used this alleged chemical assassination attempt on the Skripals to expel all the diplomats. I mean, like 23 diplomats from Russia. I forget the number. I mean, it was like a whole boatload of diplomats, Russian diplomats in the UK, legitimate diplomats. And the other Western democracies, France, the United States, followed suit, which is just stupid because you don't kick out the people that you have to talk to, okay, in the middle of a fucking crisis. It's like, okay, I'm negotiating with you, but we reach an impasse, so get out of the room. I don't want to talk to you anymore. That's like a fucking child throwing a tantrum. It's absurd.
Can I ask a stupid question? Like, considering how many times we've thrown out Russian diplomats, are we in like a revolving door situation where we're bringing them in later so we can throw them out again at a later date?
Who
Or do we just
knows?
have an endless supply of diplomats that are just there for the sake of being thrown out?
Maybe
what I
it could be. Like back in the aristocracy, there was the whipping boy. Okay, the prince who was a child, of course, and was taking his lesson. Right, and he failed to learn his lesson. Well, then the schoolmaster, of course, couldn't strike the prince, rap him on the knuckles or wherever. So they had a little boy, a little peasant boy, who'd be the whipping boy. That's where the phrase comes from, And the schoolmaster, rather than rap the knuckles of the prince, would rap the knuckles of the whipping boy, or beat his ass, or God knows what, or probably bugger him senseless. Those fuckers, they're all crazy, right? But the point I'm trying to make, maybe these these diplomats are basically the whipping boys. They get kicked around. They get ping ponged back and forth between Moscow and Washington. But it's first class flights. 5-star hotels. It's not a bad life. I wouldn't mind being a 5-star whipping boy. Yeah, sure. Get yelled at once in a while, and then fly first class and get to eat caviar on the plane. Why not? Sure.
Yeah, this is the business of the State Department, waiting for the opportunity to be kicked out.
Yeah,
Because you're it's like it's almost like you think of how certain maybe musical singers in the 90s, like I was the crazy punk rocker that got kicked out of the hotel for smashing up the rooms. Like, this is as close to the State Department's ever going to get to being a punk rocker.
Yeah, I
was
guess so.
thrown out of Russia.
Yeah, but
because
no,
you're fundamentally
no,
fundamentally right.
Yeah, but
About-
talking seriously about this whole situation, it's so fucking insane. Okay, so I'm trying to understand what is the motivation of the Western democracies. Why is it? I mean, the only thing I see insofar as Theresa May's behavior is that she wanted to distract public opinion from the botch job she's making out of the whole Brexit situation. That's my only conclusion. Do you have anything more intelligent insofar as a conclusion?
With regard to May, no, that's pretty much my opinion. I'm trying to think of why Trump is going down this route, and I think it's probably similar to the degree to which, to the extent to which he thinks these actors of state are going to continually undermine him. Is if he thinks throwing them little meaningless bones like this is going to potentially just keep them at bay, so he can kind of make his way through another few months without having another crisis kind of land in his lap and derail him for the next God knows how long.
Yeah,
maybe that's what's motivating him.
Yeah, that's what
I certainly don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm also thinking, like, just from a strategic standpoint, picking fights with Russia is the worst thing we could be doing. In my mind, Russia should be we should be fighting to make Russia our ally against have a unified front against China.
Yeah.
The Chinese, I mean, I am a student of John Mearsheimer on this. They are the next biggest threat. They're the ones most likely to want to be a hegemon, at least in, control Asia in their sphere, and if not more. I think, we should, in the old tradition of realist foreign policy, should just,
Realpolitik.
make amends. Realpolitik. And arguably, we're being more successful at that story with the Koreas than we certainly are with Russia. I think right now, for good or ill, or for whatever near-term political reasons for it, making Russia a whipping boy is just making them more and more comfortable getting closer to China, and they're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another situation that you have to. Okay, first of all, regarding your point about Trump throwing a bone to the neocons, absolutely. And the way that this latest attack happened, it was just with so much anticipation that the Syrians and the Russians moved their people out of any kind of like potentially threatening area, and those guys on the ground know where they're going to hit. Okay, because they're not stupid. They're very professional militaries. Okay, so they're going to look at the map and figure, okay, the Americans are going to hit us here, 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 here. Get the people out. Get the people out and the essential equipment, and leave it just like a shell, and let the Americans blow it up. Okay, I saw some tweet or something like that was so indicative of this whole situation. It was like, imagine that the Russians sent cruise missiles all across the United States after the Waco, Texas event, where the American government killed a bunch of people there, back in 93 or 94, whenever it was. It would have been just as insane. Okay, that's what we're doing. Okay, so anyway, I think that Trump did it just to appease the neocons and throw them a bone. I think also that the appointment of John Bolton was that, and the fact that Bolton was appointed and Trump has essentially not done anything he has recommended. I think it proves that Trump named him just to appease the neocons, to keep them, happy and content, like a pit bull that you throw a bone, or throw a little bunny at. you rephrase that. I think that that's the whole point of it. I think that, look, here's something that I think also gnaws at the neocons in a way that it's a niche that they cannot stop scratching. I think that they fundamentally recognize that Putin is a better player than they are, a far superior player. I'm talking Putin and his team, or Putin individually. It doesn't matter. I mean, let's talk about Putin as team or individual. The Russians, they are playing things better. They snagged Crimea, okay, and they snagged it real good. I'm living right now in Ukraine. I can tell you that the Russians, they're never going to invade Ukraine. They don't want to. Why would they want to? To have to deal with millions of civilians and administer the whole thing? No, they're going to keep on bumping the table and keep Ukraine unstable, but never invade it. Just little pot shots, just to keep it there in eastern Ukraine, because it costs them practically nothing. Minimal cost in terms of lives and weaponry, and just that constant instability, okay, keeps Ukraine off kilter. They'll never really be able to join the EU or let alone NATO. It's always going to be there, but it neutralizes Ukraine as potentially falling into the lap of NATO, right? And of course, owning the Crimean Peninsula, and the Russians own it. It is theirs. They are never letting it go. So Putin won there. He is winning in Syria. He backed the right guy, and he backed him full on. He didn't hesitate, gave him all the support he needed, and backed him up fully, and they're winning. Okay? Syria is pretty much intact, and they're pretty much beating back ISIS all over the place. The Russians are winning. They keep winning. The last time they made a mistake was when they poisoned journalist Litvinenko with polonium. And that absolutely was a case of the Russian state doing it, no question. That was an assassination by the Russian state. I actually don't think that Putin approved that. I've always thought that was some like third-tier guy who decided to get clever and thought he was playing James Bond, like the Oliver North character, because Oliver North was not top tier or even second tier. He was a third-tier guy who got into his head to do this whole Iran-Contra thing of arms for, drugs for weapons and money and all that shit. I think that, it was a third-tier guy in Russia who did that. And I think that after that happened, which was the last serious mistake that the Russians indisputably committed, the Russians have not made any mistake. And I think that, Putin really has his team locked down tight. He's winning. And I think that that's what drives him nuts.
What's interesting is, funny you had mentioned the Ukraine or the Crimean
situation. I remember at the time explicitly when the likes of the people, especially like for whatever reason, the people who write at The Economist are the most notorious, or some of the most notorious, like anti-Russian folks around. Not surprising.
Yeah.
And I remember them trying to say, "Oh, seizing Crimea is such a failure on the Russian side because it's just going to cost them so much effort. It's just a sign of Putin's, inability to control things." I'm like, "You're an idiot."
Yeah.
Of course, taking Crimea made sense. It was primarily Russian area. It was the peninsula surrounding the Sevastopol fleet. It gives them the control point over the Black Sea. There was absolutely nothing to say that this was a failure to take the Crimea. This is our side, and I think our side has been doing this for a while, trying to paint his victories as his defeats and thus our victories, or somehow we have something, we're smarter than that.
Yeah.
And it comes across like a guy who, it's like, if you got to say, you're the smartest guy in the room, you're not.
Yeah. Exactly. No, I think that in every analysis, there is no way that you can say that Putin has not won. He's always played the patient game. He lets the other guy make mistakes, and he gets out of the way of their mistakes. Okay, he's a smart guy. He's a smart customer. And did you see the interview that he did with Oliver Stone?
I did. So I actually think that was amazing.
That was amazing. That was an amazing sequence of interviews. For people who don't know, Oliver Stone, the two-time Academy Award-winning director of Platoon and Born on the 4th of July and Natural Born Killers and all the rest of it, he did a series of interviews with Putin over a number of months, years actually. I think it was 2-3 years, something like that. And he assembled them into 4 documentaries, a 4-part documentary of about an hour each. Now, what's interesting about how he did the interviews is that, see, in each of these 4 parts, he sort of like mixes and matches between the different interviews he conducted over the years with Putin. And it paints him in a very interesting light. You know what I was shocked to realize? That Putin is a shy guy.
Yeah.
I was surprised at that. He's a fundamentally shy, low-key guy, because did you see how he interacted with, there's a trivial scene at one point where Oliver Stone's current wife shows up for some reason, and he speaks to her in English. It's like the only time he speaks in English, and he speaks it fluently, just as he speaks German fluently. And though the interview itself that he conducted with Oliver Stone was conducted in Russian, which is, of course, the sensible thing to do. But he speaks informally to his wife and just says nice things. "Oh, you must be very proud," or something like that. And you could tell that the guy is a fundamentally shy, low-key guy. That surprised me. I never anticipated that.
So for me, no, it's not too surprising. But if you think about where he came from, right? He's a KGB functionary in operating arguably internally. He was in East Germany, I believe. The last post. Arguably he's the bureaucrat who's, says, "Okay, I got a job to do and I'm going to do it." In his case, because remember, he accelerated to the top of the Russian state very quickly.
Yeah.
He went from, local politician to head of basically the KGB successor, to head of the parliament, to basically Yeltsin's job, very, in a rapid pace. So, and it seems to me like this is a man who, he doesn't seem to have the ego in the sense that others might expect of him. I think he's the man who says, like, "I've got a job to do, and I'm going to do it." And I've never really felt, even if he could very well be the richest man in the world by, accumulating wealth of Russia. That could very well be the case. But I never got the sense from him that every chess move he's doing in Russia is just for the sake of saying Putin's good. You know what I mean? I think he's legitimately doing it for the country as such. So that, that shyness and everything, that just seems appropriate given that situation. The other thing that I enjoyed about that documentary is it's a nature of doing interviews. Some people think that a confrontational interview really demonstrates something. It reveals something. You win your points against him. That's false. Even if you think Putin was a fundamental son of a bitch, letting him kind of articulate himself and how he thinks is even more useful than saying you're an asshole. And I remember at the time that documentary came out, when Oliver Stone went on the Colbert Show,
and you know where this is going.
No.
You know, Colbert is like lambasting him for saying, "Why'd you give easy questions to Putin?" He's like, he didn't give him easy questions. He just let Putin speak.
Yeah.
He didn't waste time by fighting Putin all the time. That isn't to say he didn't pose serious questions to Putin. I think he did.
Yeah.
But he was more interested in hearing what Putin had to say, which I was also more interested in hearing, because our media doesn't really care much for that. So I give Stone credit for that. And the other thing that Stone did during that interview with Colbert, which I appreciate, is after Colbert did his anti-Russian shtick, you know, in a very modest kind of way, you know, Stone just, you know, a bewildered look on his face. He says, "I don't understand why we think this is valuable, you know, raising the stakes of a potential conflict with Russia. What do we gain from it?" Colbert naturally had nothing to say to that, but Stone cares about that, and he's cared for a while. And you know, now
Wait, hang on. Let me ask you: was this the Colbert report where Stephen Colbert is making the character, or was it the Late Show?
Oh no, this was the Late Show. This was because remember that? Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so he was playing like the right wing idiot on the Late Show. Oh man, that's kind of sad.
It's funny how Stephen Colbert is an interesting cat.
I've come to despise all of these late night comedians.
Oh no, I can't in for the life of me in countenance any of them anymore. And like even like the most palatable Jimmy Fallon is just like he's just like a what's the best way to describe him? He's a normie. That's the best you got of the lot. The rest of them are just, you know, Democratic apologists in a most unfunny way. They're not funny.
Yeah, they're not funny. And the thing is, they are propagandists for war. These guys, they were all in favor of like attacking Syria and stuff. Look, is it me, or is that the entire culture becoming more and more politicized and polarized? Because these guys, look, I remember growing up with Johnny Carson, right? And Johnny Carson would throw shit both ways, Democrat and Republican, right? He famously said that the only time that he held off on hitting a politician was when he found out that some long forgotten politician turned out to be an alcoholic with serious problems. Then he laid off. Then he just didn't even mention him. Okay, but to everybody else, you know, he would fling it in both directions because he was middle of the road. But now all the late night comedians, they are all following in the Jon Stewart snarkiness, left wing kind of thing. And well, Jimmy Kimmel is just a fucking outright advocate. And I find it so hypocritical because that son of a bitch, back in the day with the Man Show with Adam Carolla, he was all in favor of objectifying women and you know staring at their boobs and asses. You know, what the hell?
I remembered him as the sidekick to Ben Stein on Win Ben Stein's Money. So I'll just throw that. Oh God,
that's
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, you were a sidekick at a game show. My friend. It's like, let us keep things humble here. You know, that's my take on that matter. And to your point, you know, like not too long ago, hosts had the general and reasonable idea that to alienate half the audience did not seem to make sense from a number of different fronts. Be it economic, number one, but also just, you know, for entertainment purposes and arguably even moral matters. Like Johnny, to your point, Johnny Carson's, you know, ribbing both sides, but what he's really saying is no one who has a particular political opinion is shunned from this show. Right. And Johnny, you know, in his private life, I think was just like mild Republican in reality.
Yeah, he was a California Republican.
Yeah, exactly. At a time when that was a thing. I'd like to remind people that was a thing not too long ago. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, then that's changed. And it's funny because it's changed to the point where it's actually, you could see the harder the left-wing argument or the propaganda goes, the lower the audience goes. I mean, in an obvious way, just people don't want to be lectured to.
Yeah.
On that front. I mean, and it's one thing to say, like, I'll give Bill Maher credit, even though he annoys me as well. He never lied at any point about saying, like, you know, this is a show with a political opinion. You knew it going in that he wasn't like a pure late night show. For these guys, like, they inherited a show with a legacy of being there for everybody. And they have kind of just arguably shit on the legacy. And I don't want to say like, oh, this great institution of the Tonight Show. I mean, it's the fucking Tonight Show.
Yeah, it's a television program.
Exactly. But, you know, there was a certain, for what for the general attitude of saying, I inherited something that I want to respect. There's no fucking attitude like that, even for little petty things like I said, late night shows.
Yeah, no, I think that they become so politicized following the Jon Stewart model, who was this left wing snark. And that worked perfectly fine in Comedy Central, which was a cable channel. But they've translated this attitude, this snarkiness, to the mainstream. And it pisses off half the population. And I don't see a point of that.
Do you remember? It was actually a good. I gotta look and find it and provide a link to people. There was not too many years ago. Did you remember that article, like The Age of Snark? Or was the title was like that. It may have even been published by Vox when Vox was actually viable.
Yeah.
About saying like, look, there's this general attitude of snark on the left in their shows. They said shows like the Jon Stewart show, but also John Oliver is part of that. Samantha Bee would be part of that. Where it's just that they don't really offer any vision of the future. It's just snarky condescension a la Gawker.
Yeah.
And he said at the time, and this was before the 2016 election, I know that for a fact, or at least I hope I know that for a fact. Let's say I know that for a fact, that this is not good. This is not healthy. It just creates a denatured sense of social debate, and it doesn't offer anything, and people think it's sophisticated, and it's actually stupid.
Yeah, it is stupid. And it's all good and fine to make fun of somebody, but you can't make fun of the same people over and over and over again, because then it just pisses off people. And also, you wind up encouraging the darker impulses of one side or the other. I'm talking both sides, by the way. Just as like on YouTube, we have a lot of people who hit on the SJWs and the feminists nonstop. It's not that the feminists and the SJWs are wrong on every fucking single thing. They are wrong on a lot of things. But what happens is that the people who become, are following this kind of content, become completely desensitized to the opposing view. And I think that is something that I think is very, very bad. But the other problem is that opposite side also becomes desensitized and is unwilling to adjust to reality. Look. Bottom line, I think that the population is becoming more and more polarized, and I think that the mass media and this perverse partnership between government agents and the mass media that is pushing for war with Russia, as we started this conversation about, I think it's catastrophic, because when you have the media and the government all pushing in one direction, then you're in trouble. You're really in trouble, because nobody is making any kind of a pushback. The only one was Tucker Carlson. He's the only one who was like, no, I'm not playing this game. This is, what the fuck is the point of this? You saw that rant he had?
He's had so many good ones, but yeah, I know exactly that on the war in particular.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pointless to go to war in Syria. There's nothing to be won. And all these people who are saying that it's a good thing. And he himself said, when there's bipartisan support for war, then you know that there's something's off. And yeah. There's something completely off. There was a time, there were a few days where all of a sudden everybody across the political spectrum was baying for war. And it was so weird. It was as if somebody had hit a big red button. It bothers me tremendously. It bothers me tremendously that the American intellectual classes or the thought leaders or whatever the hell you want to call them, that they are so willing to push for war so callously and ridiculously and pointlessly.
Can I bring up an interesting observation, since we mentioned Tucker Carlson and Jon Stewart?
Yeah.
In this conversation, go back a while. Go back to 2004.
Okay.
Remember the big event there was a big event at CNN that happened around then. So this is right after, this is right around the Bush Kerry election. Mm-hmm. And CNN used to have a program called Crossfire, which was Tucker Carlson, Robert Novak against whatever the liberals they had. I don't read.
Actually, yeah, it was originally Michael Kinsley and Robert Novak. And then Novak was the conservative, so it couldn't have been Carlson and Novak. It must have been somebody else. But yeah, go ahead.
And I think even in the 80s, I think Buchanan was...
Buchanan and McKinley. That's how they started. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember, so 2004, Jon Stewart comes on, and they're doing, Tucker Carlson and doing the shtick, and Jon Stewart turns to him and says, like, you guys continually doing this,
Right.
us versus them was bad, and this, that, and the other, and like, he really took Tucker Carlson to task for it, and I think Jon Stewart got a lot of credibility for that as the sort of,
Yeah.
not necessarily centrist, but certainly a guy who said, like, why are you being this antagonistic? Let's forward the clock and see who wound up evolving the better for wears as a result of that conversation. Tucker, I'd say, completely transformed away from the sort of, yellow bow tie and khaki pants and blue shirt and blue sport coat conservative to an honest to God, like, American national patriot.
Yeah.
And was a lot more serious about it. And what did Jon Stewart produce? His underling, his Untermensch of John Oliver, Samantha Bee, Stephen Colbert, all those crowds. What have they evolved into? They have evolved into the propaganda machine you had just mentioned.
Yeah.
So ironically enough, it is, if it is, to use, I feel like I quote the Bible too much for the show, but so be it. By your fruits ye shall know them.
Yeah.
Who had the worst fruits?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tucker Carlson hasn't had any fruit, if you will, insofar as people who followed in his path, at least not yet. But then again, he hasn't had the opportunity to nurture that talent the way that The Daily Show under Jon Stewart did. Because all those people that you mentioned, they all came from The Daily Show, right? Certainly Colbert, certainly
John Oliver, Samantha Bee.
Yeah, they all did. Yeah, and Trevor Noah, well, his show tanked and he got... Is he still around? I don't know.
I think he still hosts the current iteration of The Daily Show. It was the other sort of... Is it like, was he like a gay black guy? Who was that one guy? He was also like a snarky left-wing show, and he got fired, and he said it was because he was black or something.
Yeah, it was because he was black that he got hired. That's the bottom line.
Ouch. Ouch. Yeah. We're going to get our podcast taken down now.
No, that's the truth. You got to call them like you see them. But no, look, we're seeing more and more how popular entertainment is going hand in glove with the deep state. The deep state, the neocons who want war. The neoliberals who want war, no matter what, who they think it's a good thing. Look, I got into a shitload of trouble and a big fight back in 2010, was it? I got in a fight with Paul Krugman because I accused him that he was essentially saying that World War II was great because it helped the American economy, and so that the way to fix the American economy was for another big war. And he actually had like a whole column about it and threw a hissy fit over the fact that I'd made that accusation. And you can find the postmortem in salon.com. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, these neoliberals and neocons, they're one and the same thing. They all think that a war, pointless Keynesian destruction, is how you grow an economy and make it better. By consuming more, by spending more, by more. And if destruction is what's necessary to create that consumption, so be it. I think that these people are warmongers. I think that they're evil people.
I completely agree. They are evil. And extra points to those playing at home. What economic fallacy did they just articulate that you called them out on? 3, 2, 1. It's the broken window fallacy, is it not?
Yeah, the broken window fallacy. Yeah, that by breaking a window, the fact that you have to repair it and fix it causes such economic. Aggregate consumption that it benefits the economy overall, which of course means that why don't we just have a perpetual civil war and destroy everything, break every single window in the entire society? Then we'll constantly have consumption all the time, right? Isn't that a good way to live? Yeah, right? It's fucking insane, okay? It's morally despicable. But
it is the thing I've also noticed, and this is why, even though as you and I both know, there's a certain degree which the label of conservative, it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth because I think most conservatives don't conserve anything. But one of the reasons why I still there's value to it is in contrast to a lot of the liberal and the neoliberals or the neoconservatives that you'd mentioned. Anybody who is professing a program of saying, I got a vision for the world that I'm going to fix and I'm going to improve it, invariably they are the ones who are going to lead you down to some very nasty, disgusting shit. Yeah. Because they want to recreate the world. They can fix it. We'll work on it. We can tinker, goddammit. Tinkering is war. Don't let them tell you otherwise. It's tinkering is destruction.
Yeah.
The conservative tendency, ironically,
even like we had mentioned it privately before. How fucking ironic was it that the fascists and the far right wingers were the ones who saying, don't do this, don't waste your time, don't waste your blood, and they were the ones who fundamentally basically said we don't want to see more brown people getting killed.
Yeah, yeah. And here's the weird thing that the left, yeah, sure, they constantly say that they're anti-war, blah, blah, blah. But did you see them really doing anything over stopping the Syria thing? Not really. There's like, oh, it would be bad, war is always bad, peace now, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't actually have like a hissy fit the way that the hard right, the alt right, and even the alt light had, because everybody on the extreme right, the hard right, even some Republicans, they were like, no, 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 we don't want a war, no war, no war. They were the ones who were pacifists, which is fucking crazy. This is a topsy-turvy world that we're living in.
And what's also disturbing about that is that arguably all of the pins were set up in such a way to make it easy for the left to knock them down. By that, you've got a Republican administration being advised by neoconservatives
right.
in a war in the Middle East. It's like literally you could sneeze and knock these pins down.
Yeah,
you're
right.
They didn't.
And they didn't. They didn't take the shot. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Oh man, these guys, these Dems, man, they're just so. They're so. Look, my thinking, and we've talked about this before, and I'm probably boring the listeners now, but my thinking has always been that the neoliberalism, that's the problem. That's the key problem. When the Democrats fully embraced neoliberalism under Clinton, and both parties became the one party insofar as economic policy, and that economic policy is neoliberalism, which is basically a mild Keynesianism, but it's all in favor of war. I mean, that's when the ship of state went south. I'm mixing my metaphors, but you know what I mean.
I do, yeah.
It's come on, man. I mean, no, it's astonishing, And the thing is, see, to go on about the fucking lefties, right? The things that are going on to the working classes of the Western democracies, it's just pathetic that they don't say a thing about them. They go on and on and on about blacks and discrimination and racism and blah, blah, blah. But they don't talk about working classes, how they are completely disenfranchised and alienated from their society. That's why you have this opioid explosion. Nobody talks about it. It's like this dirty little secret. It's like the incest that's going on in the family, but everybody knows about it, but nobody wants to talk about it.
I think that's right. And I think it also is a sign to me of how a lot of the far left voices are either really, useless and you can't even hear them, or they're just useful idiots. Because I do pay attention to some far left people, and it's a very small minority of the old style Marxists who are basically say class identity is important. The working class is going to get fucked by all of these things. I even know groups who are not extraordinarily negative on Trump because they know that he's actually rustling the feathers of the real enemy, which is neoliberalism, in his kind of weak-willed, kind of milquetoast kind of way to do it, but still, that it's better than just reinforcing it with Clinton. And those, you'll never hear those guys. They're very marginal thinkers. In fact, those guys are considered like brocialist is the phrase that was sometimes used for them. Male socialists. The idea is like, you guys don't understand that minorities and women are oppressed identities that supersede any notions of class identity. And it's like, I've seen this merry-go-round before. The left is that kind of left is never going to come back.
No. But this circles back to my original notion that this is a Galtieri moment insofar as Russia is the boogeyman. You see, there are internal problems insofar as the working classes are concerned, and the elites know it. They are stupid, perhaps, or they make stupid decisions, and they might be willfully blind, but they're not completely blind. They realize that the economic policies of the last 30, 40 years have caused untold suffering and damage to the working classes, to the backbone of the Western democracies, because ultimately it was this backbone that created the prosperity of the Western democracies that these people are frittering away. So they look at Russia as a good way to distract from their failure to fix the domestic situation of the Western democracies. They are using Russia, and Russia is pirouetting away. And I think that that's what drives them a little bit nuts, because unlike somebody as buffoonish and stupid as Kim Jong-un, and we'll get to him in some other opportunity, but Kim Jong-un does stupid shit, and he sort of like lands himself squarely in the crosshairs of the deep state, of the MSM, call him what you will, this cathedral that is trying to distract, right? But Putin, he just keeps pirouetting away. He keeps outplaying the West. And the West, they keep doing dumber and dumber shit that becomes more and more obviously transparent. The Syria attack, which the OPCW says, oh, turns out no chemical weapons have been found so far. We'll keep on looking, but, so far nothing. I mean, if they'd found it, they would have found it immediately. If it had been like a real chemical attack, they would have found it immediately. And look, there are lots of doctors there and a lot of people on the ground there at Duma, I think a place was called in Syria, who say there was no chemical attack. Nobody came in with any kind of symptom of any kind of chemical agent or anything of the sort. And they're dismissed. The OPCW goes, they don't find anything. So what does that tell you? Either, the Syrians and the Russians decide to hide all that shit, or it never happened, right? Which is more likely? Occam's razor, So it's all like a move to distract from the decay of the West, as opposed to facing the problems and trying to fix them, for crying out loud.
I'll build on that because I think you're right. There is a sort of distracting move going on. But I also ask myself, why Russia as the big enemy, right? Because it's not just like, oh, they're anti-democratic. We get into bed with a lot of anti-democrats. We're fine with the Chinese in many respects.
The Saudis.
That's the Saudis. Let's not play that game.
Sure.
Why Russia in particular? Well, the closest thing I can get is because they are conscientiously, it's like, we're not the road that you're traveling. And particularly because they are Europeans, admittedly Eastern Europeans, but you look at the Russian zone, Eastern European broadly in the face, and you see Europe that did not take the path that we took. And it's almost like, the vision of bad consciousness that we need to rub out. These Europeans chose not to do what we did. How dare they? We made the right decision. You made the wrong decision. You're
talking about like multi-culti and all that shit?
Multi-culti, the
immigration, blah, blah.
Pro-consumerism, immigration. It's like Eastern Europe is the face of the bad consciousness of the West.
The guilt.
The guilt. And also the niggling suspicion that are we wrong? The fact that someone chose not to. Mm-hmm. There was an option not to do this. Were we wrong?
Yeah.
I feel like that has to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think that is part of it. And I think that the Russians during the 90s saw what Western consumerism ultimately leads to, which is nihilism and perversion and decadence. And they recoiled from it collectively.
And even though it's a lot of brown faces added to the mix of all those bits of Western Europe, Brussels, Paris, and whatnot that's going downhill and in a the shit-filled kind of way, and it reminds us of like the worst cities of the third world. Arguably, you could even say that's kind of what Russia was put through in the 90s, albeit without immigration, right? That level of destituteness, that lack of hope, that just utter
nihilism.
Sense of disgust, nihilism. That's what they survived in the 90s by the skin of their teeth.
And you're thinking that we're living through that, and we don't think that we're going to survive, so we're throwing shit their way.
But the worst thing about it is like we're living through it, but we the people who see it as a problem are labeled the insane ones.
Yeah, we're Nazis.
They're the extremists. Yeah, we're the Nazis and everything. And Russia, the Russians who chose to do something about it were Nazis. Russia should have been happier to have Western Europeans extract what remains of the value out of the country and whatnot.
Yeah. I think that there might be something there on a subliminal level. There's also the other obvious fact, and the elephant in the room, is that there is a antipathy, a tremendous antipathy towards Russia on the part of a lot of neocons for personal reasons. and that's something that's a whole other ball of wax, and a very nasty ball of wax if you get right down to it. I mean, a lot of prickly thorns in that particular ball of wax, because a lot of these people were forcibly ejected from Russia, either in pogroms or because they were on the losing side of the Trotsky-Stalin fights of the
Exactly, yeah.
1920s. So a lot of the neocons, a lot of neocons are basically red diaper babies. Their
Yep.
parents were Trotskyites. They were Jewish intellectuals who had been kicked out of the shtetl, in pogroms, and they immigrated to the United States during the late 19th century. Or they were Russian communists who had lost essentially the semi-civil war between the Trotskyites and the Stalinists, and had fled to the United States. And their children had, heaven forfend to them, they probably were rolling in their grave when their children all became conservatives and anti-communists, right? But that hatred towards Russia remained. And I at one point I thought that was sort of like a silly notion, but then starting to look at a lot of these people, like for instance, like Anne Applebaum, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, she has this severe hatred of anything that smacks of Russian nationalism, even tangentially. It's really remarkable. I mean, a deep-seated hatred that is. It's unclear where it's the source, unless it's like a familiar source.
To the point, ironically enough, to the point it even manifests with regard to the country she nominally loves, which is Poland. She's married to the former foreign minister of the pro-European party, the PO. The Polish name I won't say because I can't pronounce it. But that was the party that was kicked out.
The conservative Polish government now, the PIS, is their party name, and they very much are going Polish nationalism openly.
Well, now they're calling them Nazis all of a sudden.
They're calling them Nazis, and a lot of what's being said in America about Poland now, this right-wing nasty turn in Poland, a lot of that is filtered through Anne. And Anne is not an unbiased person in this by any stretch of the term.
Yeah.
Take all notes about Poland with a grain of salt from her.
Yeah. By the way, to the audience, for those of you who might not know, it wasn't that I was picking Anne Applebaum's name out of a hat. She's a journalist and a Pulitzer Prize winner that in the scheme of things is relatively minor, but she actually is a big player, and most of the attitudes of the intelligentsia in Washington and New York about Poland are filtered or severely influenced by her. She's not as trivial of a figure as I might have inadvertently implied. She actually matters. I think that,
The other thing that I've noticed, people in our crowd will notice this. There are there's that meme going around of all of the Western European leaders. Well, maybe not every last one, but a lot of the major ones. I think Theresa May, Angela Merkel, the current head of Denmark, Macron. None of them have children.
Yes, no skin in the game. Yeah.
Putin has children.
Yes.
Putin has a family.
Yes.
That's invested in the country. Trump has a family. Go through the list. Yeah.
Yeah. It's unclear how many children Putin has. Because
officially, officially he has 2.
Yeah, but apparently he has like a common law wife currently, and apparently they might have another kid or 2, but it's unknown. He certainly has grandchildren, though. I mean, known, acknowledged grandchildren. And it's not something that he has bastards roaming around, but rather that he's very careful as to what is known about his personal life. For the obvious reasons, for the possibility of kidnapping and blackmail and what have you. But what do we call it? All of the Western European leaders currently of the big powers, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Scotland, none of them have children. Denmark, I think Sweden also. I think that's very, very dangerous because look, as a father, your thinking changes radically when you have children. When you have children, because you start thinking about them, about their well-being. Even if you're a politician who's lives for the job, you're always going to be thinking about your kid and how to make things better for them, how to situate them better in the future, which is perfectly natural. But the thing is, a childless person does not know this. And any childless person who says to me, oh, they can imagine it, it's bullshit. It's a completely different thing to imagine something than to be living it. Okay. And in this case, insofar as having children, the preoccupation that you have for them, the worries that you have for their future, that's a tangible thing, and it drastically modifies your attitude towards the world around you and towards the society you live in. And you start worrying about preserving and creating and preserving a society where they are welcome. And you don't go for this, I'll tell you right now, you don't go for this multicultural shit. You wind up wanting to have your kids hanging out with people like them. And I'll tell you right now, in my own case, my kids go to private schools, because I don't want them mixing with the wrong sorts of people. And you're like, oh, you're highfalutin, you're like stuck up, you got your nose in the air or something like that. No. I want them to mix with the best people so that they have the best future. And that's life. And when you don't have kids, you can have the luxury of saying, oh, state school is fine. But when you actually have them, fuck that. Private school. I can afford it, I'll pay. That's the reality.
And there is something Jeremy Corbyn, interestingly enough, does have kids, but he did something which I know superficially people would say, oh, how wonderful. But when I think about it, it's actually dangerous that he would even consider it. He has kids, but he made a point of saying, I'm not sending them to private schools. I'm sending them to the public schools and whatnot, just so I could prove that have a good socialist bona fides. And I know people superficially will say, oh, wow, good for him. He's not a hypocrite. But at some level, it's like saying, but what he's really saying is that even his children are not important enough to supersede his
ideology,
political attitudes and ideology. And that's dangerous.
Yes, I think it's extremely dangerous. Okay. I want my children to go to better schools than I did too. I went to very good schools, but I want them to go to better schools, but not the University of Chicago.
Oh yes, and, yes. They would just be too sophisticated for this world if they went there. You can send them to what podunk college did you go to in the middle of nowhere?
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, the Ivy League one. Because the University of Chicago ain't Ivy League, brother. It ain't. It's just it's in flyover country. What can I say? I look down on it when I'm flying from coast to coast. What can I say? Okay.
Ivy is a weed that grows on old rotting buildings.
Yes, exactly. And you wish you had them over the UFC. Okay, look.
Actually, we do have ivy on our
And the funny thing is that Dartmouth doesn't. They remove it because it weakens the buildings.
Exactly, yeah.
So anyway, on that note, we're going to call it a podcast, and it's been a delight. Dr. Benway, why don't you take it away?
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Coach, and a pleasure to have an audience listening to it. Everybody take care.
All the best.